What would you do if, at the age of 19, you found yourself pregnant and your parents told you to either abort the baby or leave the house? This is my story. When I chose to keep the baby, my parents kicked me out. I tried to explain that aborting the baby would get us into big trouble, but my father wouldn't listen. 10 years later, I decided to return and finally share the truth with them. When I did, they were left in complete shock. Let's dive into this emotional journey. Growing up, our house felt more like a military camp than a home. My father, a college teacher, ran everything with strict rules and high expectations. My older sister, Rose, was the perfect child obedient, always focused on school and constantly striving to make everyone happy. I was the complete opposite, always pushing boundaries and testing limits. "Lily, sit up straight," my father would snap during dinner. "A lady doesn't slouch." I'd roll my eyes, sit up as he demanded, and then slouch again the moment his attention shifted. It was a never-ending power struggle. My mother didn't speak much, but her silence spoke volumes. She had her own way of enforcing the rules with disapproving glances at my clothes or the friends I chose. "What will the neighbors think?" she'd always ask. Even though home felt stifling, I found small ways to carve out my own space. At 17, I started dating Petunia, a 20-year-old college student, everything my parents would disapprove of. We kept our relationship secret, meeting whenever we could. For a while, it felt like I was finally gaining some control over my life. I even had plans to go to college to escape my parents' rigid grasp, but life, it seemed, had other plans. A few months after my 19th birthday, I began feeling sick every morning. At first, I brushed it off as stress from studying for my upcoming exams, but soon the symptoms became impossible to ignore. I still remember standing in the small, dingy gas station bathroom, holding a plastic pregnancy test in my trembling hands. One pink line appeared. Positive. I was pregnant. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what to do. I knew I had to tell Petunia, but every time I tried to call him, fear kept choking me, and I'd hang up. Finally, I couldn't avoid it any longer. We met at our usual spot, a small park tucked away from the world's eyes. Petunia smiled when he saw me, but his smile quickly vanished when he noticed my expression. "Lily, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself, unable to hold it together. "I'm pregnant," I blurted out, the words tumbling out of my mouth like a confession. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air. Petunia's face cycled through emotions, shock, disbelief, and finally fear. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I took 6 tests, and they were all positive. Petunia ran his hands through his hair, his eyes turning cold, distant. "You need to get rid of it," he said, his words flat, almost casual. "An abortion, Lily, it's the only option. We're too young for this. It'll ruin our lives." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was Petunia, the boy I thought I loved, telling me to get rid of our baby as if it were a mere inconvenience. "Get out of my sight," I hissed, the words sharp with anger. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing there. He didn't follow me, and I didn't care. I was left alone with the weight of the decision I now had to make. Telling my parents was even harder. I waited until after dinner, when my father was in his usual spot in the living room, buried behind his newspaper. My mother was knitting, as always, and Rose stood in the background, a silent observer of my turmoil. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice shaking. My father lowered the newspaper and looked at me suspiciously. "What is it, Lily?" I took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The reaction was worse than I could have imagined. My father's face turned red as he started yelling about shame and disappointment. My mother burst into tears, crying about what the neighbors would think. Rose just stood there, shocked and disgusted. "You'll get an abortion," my father said, once he had calmed down enough to speak clearly. "We'll find a discreet clinic. No one has to know about this mistake." At first, I didn't want to listen, but the pressure from my family was too much. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a doctor's office. My mother and Rose sat beside me like guards. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s, looked over my charts with a frown. Then she looked up at me, her eyes full of concern. "Lily, I need to tell you something important," she said gently. "Because of your medical history, if you have an abortion, there's a high chance you may never be able to have children again." Her words hit me hard. Never be able to have children again. Suddenly the choice was clear. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm not doing it. I'm keeping the baby." My mother gasped, and Rose rolled her eyes, but I stood my ground. The drive home was tense and silent. When we walked through the door, my father was waiting, expecting news. "Well?" he demanded. "She wouldn't do it," my mother spat, frustrated. "After everything we've done for her," my father said, his face twisted with anger. He took a deep breath and then spoke, his voice cold and final. "Get out, pack your things and leave this house. You're no daughter of mine. I won't have you embarrassing this family with your condition," my father said, his voice cold. My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes hard. "You heard your father. Go." Rose just stood there, silent and judgmental. Tears ran down my face as I rushed to my room, grabbing some clothes and throwing them into a bag. As I headed for the door, my father's voice stopped me one last time. "And don't think about coming back. As far as we're concerned, you're dead to us." The door slammed behind me with a sound that felt final and devastating. I was alone, pregnant, and homeless. In desperation, I called the only person I thought might help, my Aunt Kelly. She and Uncle Scott had always been the outcasts of the family, living in another state and rarely talking to my parents. "Lily, what's wrong, sweetie?" Aunt Kelly's voice was warm and concerned. Through tears, I explained everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "Where are you now?" she finally asked. "Outside our house? They kicked me out." Another pause. "Stay right there. We're coming to get you." The drive to Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott's house was long, but it gave me time to think about everything that had happened. Their house was small but cozy. As soon as we arrived, Aunt Kelly fussed over me, making sure I ate something, while Uncle Scott carried my bag to the spare room, which would now be mine. "It's not much," he said, placing the bag down, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." I looked around the small warm room and felt a lump in my throat. "It's perfect," I whispered. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, talking about my future, and getting used to my new life. One evening at dinner, Aunt Kelly spoke up. "We've been thinking," she said. "We want to help you continue your education." I looked up from my plate, surprised. "What do you mean?" Uncle Scott leaned forward. "We've saved some money over the years. We never had kids of our own, so we want to use it to help you go to college." I was speechless. After everything that had happened, the idea of going to college felt impossible. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Aunt Kelly smiled. "We believe in you, Lily. This baby doesn't mean the end of your dreams." With their support, I enrolled in a local community college, majoring in business management. It wasn't easy juggling classes, doctor's appointments, and the challenges of pregnancy, but I was determined to make it work. I also found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. The owner, Evelyn, was a kind woman who understood my situation and was flexible with my hours. It wasn't much, but it helped me save for the baby and contribute to Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott's household. The day my son was born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of my life. After hours of labor, I held him in my arms, amazed by his tiny fingers and toes. Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott stood nearby, smiling proudly like grandparents. "What are you going to name him?" Aunt Kelly asked softly. I looked down at my son, peacefully asleep in my arms. "Jonquil?" I whispered. It means God is my judge. Because no matter what anyone else thinks, I know I made the right choice. As I adjusted to being a mother, juggling a newborn with college classes and work, I often thought about my parents and Rose. Did they know about Jonquil? Did they regret what they had done? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had a new family now, one that accepted and loved me unconditionally. One day, during a rare break, I was scrolling through social media when a post caught my attention. It was from Rose. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. Excited to announce that Petunia and I are engaged. Can't wait to start our life together. The photo showed Rose smiling, her arm around Petunia, the same Petunia who had abandoned me and our child. They looked so happy, as if nothing had ever happened. A wave of emotions hit me. Anger, hurt, betrayal. But then I looked over at Jonquil, peacefully playing in his crib, and I realized something important. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. Everything I needed was right here. The years flew by in a blur of diapers, textbooks, and late-night study sessions. My last semester was especially tough. I was taking extra classes to graduate on time, still working at the restaurant, and taking care of an energetic 5-year-old. Graduation day was filled with emotions. As I stood in line to receive my diploma, I looked into the crowd and saw Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott beaming with pride. Jonquil sat on Uncle Scott's shoulders, waving excitedly whenever he caught my eye. The real surprise came later at the graduation party Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott threw for me. While we were celebrating, Evelyn, my boss from the restaurant, pulled me aside. "Lily, I have an offer for you," she said with a smile. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager, and I think you'd be perfect for the job." I was stunned. Me? But I've only been a waitress. Evelyn waved off my doubt. "You've been so much more than that. I've seen how you handle tough customers, how you organize the staff, and how you've balanced work, school, and motherhood. That's the kind of dedication and skill I need in a manager." It felt like a dream come true, a steady job with better pay and regular hours. It was exactly what Jonquil and I needed to start our new life. The next few years were full of positive changes. I threw myself into my new role at the restaurant, learning everything I could about management and business. Jonquil started school and grew into a smart, curious boy who loved to read and play baseball. It was at one of Jonquil's Little League games that I met Frank. He was there with his son Tyler, who was playing on the other team. We started talking, and I was instantly drawn to his kind eyes and easy laugh. "Single dad?" I asked, noticing he was alone. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Widower, actually. Tyler's mom passed away when he was a baby." My heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry. That must be hard." "It is," he admitted, "but we manage. How about you? Single mom?" I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" Our relationship developed slowly. We were both cautious, having been hurt before, and with our children in the picture, we didn't rush things. But as months passed, I found myself falling for Frank. He was kind, patient, and Jonquil adored him. A year after we met, Frank proposed. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a quiet moment in his backyard with our boys playing nearby. Our wedding was small and intimate, with only close friends and family. As I walked down the aisle with Jonquil proudly by my side as the ring bearer, I caught Aunt Kelly's eye. She was crying, but her smile was radiant. Life with Frank, Jonquil, and Tyler soon settled into a comfortable rhythm. A couple of years after our wedding, we were blessed with another addition to our family. Our daughter Betty was born on a warm spring morning. As I held her in my arms with Frank, Jonquil, and Ty gathered around the hospital bed, I felt a sense of completeness I had never known before. I loved all 3 of my children equally, Jonquil and Betty, my biological children, and Tyler, my stepson. Blood didn't matter. They were all my kids. One evening, Aunt Kelly was over helping with the kids when we were startled by a familiar voice coming from the TV. There, larger than life, were my parents. My father stood at a podium, waving to a cheering crowd. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Adam Johnson announces his candidacy for mayor." My heart nearly stopped. It had been years since I had seen my parents, even if only on a screen. My father looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still had that same stern, determined look I remembered so well. As we watched him speak about family values and moral integrity, Aunt Kelly's face twisted with anger. "Hypocrites!" she spat, her voice shaking with fury. I turned to her, shocked. "Aunt Kelly?" She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the screen. "There's something you need to know, Lily. Something they've kept hidden for years." "What?" I asked, confused. What she told me next shook me to my core. Many years ago, before Rose and I were born, my parents had their first child, a boy. But he was born with severe physical disabilities, without legs. Instead of loving and caring for him, they left him at the hospital, too afraid that he would embarrass them. I felt a whirlwind of emotion, shock, disbelief, and a deep sadness for the brother I never knew. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked Aunt Kelly, my voice shaky. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Lily. I should have, but after what your parents did to you, I didn't want to add to your pain." That night, after the kids were in bed, I made a decision. I needed to find my brother. With Frank's support, we hired a private investigator. Weeks went by, and finally, we had a lead. My brother was alive, and against all odds, he had thrived. He was a successful writer, married with kids of his own. He had been adopted by a wealthy family that had given him every chance to succeed. Meeting him for the first time was surreal. Even though he looked different, I could see parts of myself in his face. His name was Larry, and he greeted me with a warm smile and open arms. "I always knew I had a biological family out there somewhere," he said softly. "I just never thought I'd find a sister." Over the next few months, Larry and I became close. I introduced him to my family, and he welcomed us into his. His wife, Julia, coincidence that made me laugh, and their 2 children became part of our extended family. 22 years had passed since the day my parents kicked me out. Life had moved on, bringing both joy and sorrow. My oldest, Jonquil, was now 20 and had just started college on a baseball scholarship. I couldn't have been prouder of the man he was becoming. One lazy Tuesday afternoon, I was scrolling through news articles when a familiar face caught my eye. It was my father, looking older but still carrying that same air of self-importance. The headline read, "Mayor Adam Johnson discusses family values, an exclusive interview." Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the video. For a few minutes, I listened as my father talked about the importance of family and moral values. Then the interviewer asked about his children. My father's face softened into what I knew as his public sympathy look. "I have one daughter, Rose. She's the light of our lives. Tragically, we lost 2 of our children. The pain never goes away, but it's made our family stronger." For days, I seethed with quiet rage. How dare they? How dare they erase me and Larry pretending to be tragic, sympathetic figures? Almost as if fate was stepping in, Larry called. "Lily, guess what? I'm doing a book signing in our hometown next week. It would mean the world to me if you could come." I wouldn't miss it for the world, I told him, a plan already forming in my mind. The following week, I found myself back in the city where I grew up. As I walked through the familiar streets, memories came rushing back, some good but many painful. I pushed them aside, staying focused on what I needed to do. The book signing was being held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As I entered, I realized Larry hadn't been exaggerating. Half the town seemed to be there. Local celebrities, business leaders, and politicians were all mingling, waiting for the event to start. And there, in the front row, sat my parents and Rose. My father, now the mayor, looked every bit the part of a distinguished politician. My mother, elegantly dressed, smiled and nodded at people she knew. Rose sat beside them. They hadn't noticed me yet. I found a seat near the back, my heart pounding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. Larry rolled onto the stage in his wheelchair to loud applause. He looked confident and comfortable in the spotlight. As he began talking about his book and his life, I saw my parents nodding, trying to look sympathetic. "I was born with a severe disability," Larry said. "No legs and other health issues. My biological parents abandoned me at the hospital, unable or unwilling to care for me." I watched my father closely, but his expression didn't change. No recognition, no shame, just the practiced look of a politician showing concern for someone else's story. "It's a sad story," Larry continued, "but I was lucky. I was adopted by a wonderful family who gave me every opportunity to succeed. Still, I always wondered about my birth family, who they were and why they gave me up." The room was completely silent. Everyone focused on Larry as he spoke. My heart raced, knowing the moment that would change everything was coming. Then Larry smiled, his eyes sparkling with a mix of humor and determination. "But that's not the end of my story," he said. "You see, I found my family. My sister, Lily, is here today." He turned toward me, extending his hand. "Lily, would you join me on stage?" A gasp spread through the audience as I stepped into the spotlight. Many faces showed recognition. After all, I had grown up in this town. But the most dramatic reactions were in the front row. My parents' faces went pale, their expressions shifting between shock, fear, and realization. Rose looked like she had seen a ghost. They knew their carefully built image was about to fall apart. My parents stood quickly, clearly planning to make a fast exit, but I wasn't about to let them escape the truth again. "Mom, Dad, please stay," I called out, my voice echoing through the now silent room. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation, don't you?" My parents froze, trapped by the eyes of the entire audience. Slowly, reluctantly, they sat back down. I took a deep breath. "Many of you knew me growing up. You knew my family, but there's a lot you didn't know, a lot that's been hidden for far too long." And then I told them everything. How my parents had abandoned Larry at the hospital because they were ashamed of his physical differences, how they had hidden his existence, building their reputation on lies. And then history repeated itself, I continued, my voice growing stronger. When I got pregnant at 19, they didn't offer support or understanding. They demanded I have an abortion, even though doctors warned it could leave me infertile. When I refused, they kicked me out, pregnant, alone, and abandoned, all to protect their perfect image. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. I saw people's disgusted looks aimed at my parents, who seemed to shrink in their seats. "For years, I've heard them talk about family values and morality," I said, my voice full of emotion. "But their actions tell a different story. They abandoned 2 of their children when we needed them the most. They erased us from their lives to keep up their perfect image." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some at my parents, others at each other. Journalists, who had come for a simple book signing, were now furiously taking notes or speaking into their phones. In the midst of the uproar, I locked eyes with my father. The man who had once seemed so powerful in my childhood now looked small and defeated. My mother was openly crying, and Rose sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and confusion. In the days that followed, the story blew up. It was all over the local news, then the national news. My father's political career crumbled overnight. The man who had preached integrity and family values was exposed as a hypocrite. His position as mayor became untenable, and within a week, he resigned, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. The college where he had taught quickly distanced itself, firing him. Amidst all the chaos, one thing became clear. My sister Rose made her choice. She stood firmly by our parents, refusing to face the truth. During a brief phone call, she hissed, "You've ruined everything. Don't contact me again. You're dead to me, just like you're dead to Mom and Dad." But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. A few days later, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in over 22 years. It was Petunia, Rose's husband and the father of my eldest son. Lily, he said, his voice hesitant and almost shy. I've been thinking about us, about what happened. Rose and I, we can't have children, and I thought, well, we have a son together. Maybe we could be a family. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Petunia, you made your choice 22 years ago. You left me when I was pregnant with your child. You married my sister, and now, just because you can't have children with her, you think you can come back to me? No, that's not how it works. But Lily? He tried again. No, Petunia. I cut him off firmly. I have a wonderful husband and a beautiful family. I don't need you, and I certainly don't want you. Goodbye. I hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed, but the surprises didn't stop there. The next day, I got another unexpected call, this time from Petunia's parents. Lily? A tentative voice asked. This is Lauren, Petunia's mother. We just found out about Jonquil. Is it true? Do we have a grandson? The conversation that followed was emotional and eye-opening. Petunia and my parents had told them I'd had an abortion and run away. They'd spent years believing their grandchild had never existed. We'd like to meet him, Lauren said, her voice trembling. If that's okay with you, of course. We understand if you don't want us in your lives. I paused for a moment. Petunia's parents weren't responsible for what he had done, nor for the lies my own parents had spread. They had been deceived too. Okay, I said finally. I'll talk to Jonquil and see if he's open to meeting you. The meeting between Jonquil and his grandparents went surprisingly well. There were tears, hugs, and lots of catching up. Jonquil, always kind-hearted, welcomed them with open arms. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. Larry and his family became a regular part of our lives, filling our home with laughter and love. Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott doted on all the grandchildren, biological or not. As for my parents and Rose, I only heard bits and pieces about them. They had moved away, trying to escape the scandal. Part of me felt sorry for them, but I knew deep down that I had done the right thing by telling the truth. As Lily decided to face the truth and share her story with the world, everything began to change. All the secrets were exposed, and her family had to deal with the consequences of their past mistakes. Lily's story is a powerful testament to the strength of truth and the courage to stand up against family secrets and deceit. After years of being rejected and made to feel less than, Lily finally found her voice, not just for herself, but for her child. Choosing to speak out and expose her parents' wrongdoings, though painful, was the right thing to do to help Lily reclaim her freedom and peace of mind. The lesson from this story is that sometimes facing the truth and confronting the past is necessary for us to move forward. Even though family may not understand or support us, standing up for ourselves and for those we love is what matters most. Only by confronting the truth can we build a life of true freedom and happiness. What do you think about Lily's decision? If you were her, what would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to keep following these inspiring stories.
Why did you pour wine on the wedding dress? How could you ruin your sister's big day like that? Are you even a real sister? On my sister's wedding day, Mom slapped my cheek after screaming that at me. Ouch. What? Why all of a sudden? I was shocked by Mom's sudden actions and was speechless. I would never do such a thing to my dear sister's wedding dress. I tried to deny it desperately, but Mom wouldn't believe me. And even the groom started accusing me. However, a shocking truth and plot would soon come to light. My name is Kim. I'm 26 years old. I have a sister who is 3 years my junior. Her name is Amber, and we've been very close since we were children. Amber has always wanted to be a nurse, and now she's fulfilling her dream. Working as a nurse in a general hospital. Nursing is very demanding and often tough. But she finds it rewarding and wants to continue in this profession. Meanwhile, I work as a tax accountant. I've been working at the same accounting firm since graduating from university. We're both single and live at our parents' house, which is within commuting distance from our workplaces. Our father passed away a few years ago due to an illness. Since then, it's been the three of us living together. Although my mom and I don't always see eye to eye due to her spending habits, which she never seems to correct despite my repeated warnings. One day, it was decided that Amber would get married and she brought her fiancé home. Nice to meet you. I'm John Simpson, and I've been dating Amber. John is 28 years old and works at a bank. He seemed very refreshing, and I felt that Amber could be safely entrusted to him, so I heartily celebrated their union. Amber, congratulations. I'm so glad you found such a wonderful person. Thank you, Kim. Amber smiled radiantly, making me happy as if it were my own happiness. Mom also seemed happy about her marriage. With the marriage, Amber was going to move out and start a new life in a new home with John. Soon after, we received the wedding invitations. Amber had managed to reserve the wedding venue she had always dreamed of. I was also asked to give a speech, and as I prepared it, I eagerly looked forward to the wedding day. Saying there was no sadness in seeing Amber get married would be a lie. But more than that, I wanted her to be happy. I bet Amber will look beautiful in her wedding dress. I might even cry. With those thoughts, I was really looking forward to the wedding day. The day of the wedding arrived. It was a clear sunny day, as if the weather itself was blessing Amber and John. I had planned to bring a wedding board, but because of work, I was running late and brought it to the venue earlier. Then planned to give it to the newlyweds. Amber, sorry for the late wedding board. And truly, congratulations. I'm glad we could celebrate this day. Wow, what a wonderful wedding board. Thank you so much, Kim. Amber thanked me with a sparkling smile. I also extended my congratulations to John. Congratulations, John. Please take good care of Amber. However, for some reason, John slightly grimaced. Yes, thank you. I noticed John's strange expression for a moment, but it was the wedding day. And I thought he might just be nervous, so I didn't dwell on it too much. Soon, it was time for Amber and John to get ready, so I waited in the family waiting room. As the ceremony time approached, there was no call to move from the staff. Huh? The ceremony time is about to start. Maybe they're having trouble with the preparations? As I wondered, there was a loud bang, and the door was rudely opened. I turned toward the door in surprise and saw Mom standing there, pale and out of breath. Mom. What's going on? As I asked in confusion, Mom stormed up to me. Kim. Why did you pour wine on Amber's wedding dress? That's terrible. No sooner had she shouted this than she slapped my cheek hard. Ouch. What? Why all of a sudden? Caught off guard by the sudden incident, I couldn't grasp what was happening. My left cheek stung painfully where Mom had slapped me. It was the first time I had ever been slapped by someone. You're the one who poured wine on Amber's wedding dress, aren't you? Why would you do that? Mom glared at me furiously. What? What are you talking about? I would never do such a thing. I would never pour wine on my precious sister's wedding dress. I desperately denied it, but it seemed like Mom truly believed I was the culprit. In fact, Amber's wedding dress is really in such a terrible state. feeling the blood drain from my face. I quickly followed Mom to the makeup room where Amber was. Indeed, just as Mom said, Amber's wedding dress was stained bright red. And the scent of wine was unmistakable. It was clear that someone had poured wine on her wedding dress. What is this? This is too terrible. While muttering to myself, I turned towards Amber, who stood there dumbfounded in front of her wedding dress. Amber, do you know when the wine was poured? When I asked her, she slowly opened her mouth. Yeah. I went to the restroom before changing into my dress. But when I came back, it was like this. It seems that someone did this terrible thing while Amber was in the restroom. Who could do such a thing? I began, but Mom shouted. Stop playing dumb. The culprit is Kim. Mom. I'm telling you that I didn't do it. I would never tarnish Amber's dress. Why do you think it was me? I asked Mom wearily, and then she started making an outrageous claim. I saw you sneaking into the makeup room with a bottle of wine. I was wondering what she was up to because she was acting so suspiciously. No. It's a false accusation. I didn't do it. As I vehemently denied it, John looked at me with a stern gaze. Kim. I never imagined you would do such a thing. Was your blessing for us just a lie? John, you too. How many times do I have to say I didn't do it? We can't have a wedding in this dress. We'll have to cancel it. Kim, you will take responsibility for ruining our wedding. No, that can't be. But I really didn't do it. Although John accused me harshly, I kept arguing back that I hadn't done it. Stop being so stubborn. Kim, just admit it already. And take full responsibility for ruining the wedding. Why do you insist I'm the culprit? I'm telling you I saw you entering the makeup room with wine. It has to be Kim who did it. As John and Mom continued to accuse me, Amber, who had been silent until then, seemed to realize something and shouted, Kim, run. I nodded at her words and dashed off immediately. Wait. Hold on. I could feel Mom and John chasing after me from behind. If they caught me in a deserted place, they might even resort to violence. I had already been slapped by Mom. I escaped into a control room filled with staff, waiting for Mom and John. I finally caught up. Kim, running away is useless. Mom and John caught up to me, panting heavily and glaring at me. This tragedy is all because of you, Kim. Just give up quietly and take responsibility. You'll also pay for all the wedding costs, and after you've paid. John also shouted, his face twisted into a grin. Are you still saying that? No matter what you say, I didn't do it. I firmly denied the accusations, but John, looking frustrated, declared, the wedding is cancelled. It's all your fault, Kim. The wedding venue staff tried desperately to calm down John and Mom. But they were not listening. At that moment, Amber arrived with another staff member. The staff member said, we've heard all about the situation. There are surveillance cameras in the makeup room, so let's watch the footage together. Upon hearing this, John and Mom started to panic. What? There are surveillance cameras. No, well, there's really no need to check them, right? Right, Mom? Yes, that's right, John. We don't need to see the footage from the surveillance cameras when I saw Kim entering and leaving with the wine with my own eyes. John and Mom clumsily insisted that they didn't need to see the camera footage. Amber calmly told them, John, Mom, let's check the surveillance cameras. I can't believe Kim would do such a thing. and I'm sure she didn't do it. Amber. It was comforting to know that Amber believed in me. Let's all go and check the footage together. You can watch it in that room over there. The venue staff directed. Mom began to protest loudly. Wait. Let's not after all. Everything up to now, forget it. Maybe I remembered wrong when I said I saw it. Yes, I was kind of panicking too. Sorry about that. Let's just call off the wedding for today and leave it at that. As the two of them spoke nonsense, I reached my breaking point. Don't joke around. I've been accused of ruining my dear sister's wedding dress. There's no way I can just leave it like this. I will definitely check the surveillance footage. At my shout, John and Mom flinched. Amber and I, along with the venue staff, went to check the surveillance footage. Mom and John watched us from a distance, looking uncomfortable. The footage clearly showed John pouring wine onto the wedding dress. So it was John all along. I knew it. It didn't make sense for Kim to do such a thing. And it's impossible security-wise at the venue. And yet, John and Mom kept stubbornly accusing Kim. That's. John tried to make excuses, but he was at a loss for words. And John kept demanding that Kim take responsibility for canceling the wedding. Not just pay for the dress. I realized that John and Mom might have been conspiring to take money from Kim. Amber, so that's why you told me to run. Amber nodded at my question. Enraged, I confronted John and Mom. Why did you do this? Just like Amber said, were you two trying to get money from me? No, more importantly, how could you do this on what was supposed to be the brightest day of Amber's life? John then laughed defiantly, his face contorting unpleasantly. Shut up. Don't yap about it, you sisters. Just shut up. I've always been dissatisfied with Amber being just a nurse. What? Amber was shocked by his words. Being a nurse means working nights and it's incredibly busy. And the salary isn't great either. So I thought it'd be more beneficial to marry Kim, who is a tax accountant making good money. What? Stunned by his absurd reasoning, it turned out that John had discussed switching from Amber to me with Mom, who had agreed because she owed John money. They had planned this whole scheme where John would ruin Amber's wedding dress with wine, cancel the wedding, pin the blame on me, and force me to take responsibility. It's impossible for such a plan to succeed. It's too despicable. You both are out of your minds. If you were dissatisfied with Amber's profession, why didn't you discuss it before marriage instead of concocting such a plan to forcefully go through with the wedding? Disgusted, I sighed heavily. Amber, red-faced with anger, screamed at John and Mom. John, I never thought you'd be such a scumbag. And you too, Mom. How could you participate in such a plan and still call yourself a mother? John then snapped back, shut up. Just listen to me. As John began to get violent, his own parents and other relatives quickly restrained him, and the police were called. You are annoying, Amber. You should just give me the money and take care of my parents. Don't defy me even though you're a woman. While ranting, John was taken away by the police. Naturally, the wedding was cancelled. After being grilled by the police, John had to pay a significant amount of money for the cancellation fee. Because of this, his savings were insufficient, forcing him to take on debt. Lectured by relatives and known at his workplace for the incident, John lived a restricted life. Even if he wanted to quit his job, The massive debt made it impossible. Meanwhile, Amber and I declared our disownment of Mom. Amber, Kim. I'm sorry. I was in financial trouble and had borrowed a lot from John. So I had no choice but to cooperate. Mom, both Amber and I have been sending you money. But we're cutting that off, of course. As I spoke coldly, Mom's face fell in despair, and she clung to us, crying. Don't stop the remittances. Please. We're a blood-related family. Why would you treat me so harshly? The one who treated one's blood-related family harshly was you. Mom. I can never forgive you. I don't ever want to see your face again. Amber shouted, but Mom kept begging, please don't stop the remittances. Staring at her disdainfully, Amber and I prepared to move out and left the house. We rented apartments close to each other and began our new lives. After a while, Amber started dating a sincere man from her workplace. And I started going out for meals with a fellow tax accountant from my cohort. Hoping things would work out well. We have no idea about Mom's current situation. And have no intention of ever getting involved with her again. We hope she reflects on what she did. Amber and I keep in touch often. Enjoying peaceful and happy days together. It's terrible. It seems Mom has fallen down the stairs at home and gotten hurt. No sooner had I pressed the call button than my husband, Tony, spoke in a panicked voice. What? That's why. Mom's been injured. I'm going to go back to my parents' house. For a while to take care of her. I'm leaving the house stuff to you. I thought, my mother-in-law? But she's right in front of me. Right now, I'm happily having coffee with my mother-in-law at her house. What is Tony talking about? As I was puzzled, she gestured to me with her eyes. And pressed her index finger to her lips with a shoe. I nodded okay. And put my smartphone on speaker mode between my mother-in-law and me. Hey. Is it really true that Mom got hurt? Then, I'll rush over to Mom's place right now. I made sure to confirm with my mother-in-law clearly. What? No, it's okay, it's okay. You don't get along with her, right? Leave Mom's care to me. By then. Not wanting to continue the conversation any longer, Tony abruptly hung up the phone. I was dumbfounded, and my mother-in-law, who had been holding back her laughter, burst into laughter as soon as the call ended. Let's see how things go for a while. My husband, Tony, completely disinterested in me now. Still doesn't know about the secret relationship between my mother-in-law and me. I could envision his pale face in the future, and I couldn't help but smile. My name is Kathy. I have been working as a caregiving assistant since graduating from high school, and I'm now in my 50s. Tony was my high school classmate, and we got married in our late 20s. In the early days of our marriage, I had a problem. It was with his mother, Dorothy. His parents' house was nearby, so I ran into her frequently at the supermarket. Or when taking out the trash. Naturally, I always greeted her with a smile. But she always ignored me. Having been a well-educated career woman who traveled the world in her younger days, she seemed to disdain me, a high school graduate, as unsuitable for her son. However, I later realized this was a misunderstanding. One day, Dorothy confronted me about why I frequently left home late at night. From her probing gaze, I realized she suspected infidelity. You're always out late at night. I feel sorry for my son. Mom, it's not like that. Actually, the elderly I care for often wander off at night. And their families ask me to help look for them, so I end up out late. When I explained the situation honestly, Dorothy blushed and sincerely apologized for her mistake. I'm really sorry for being rude. I just assumed you were cheating. Seeing Dorothy apologize deeply, I also realized that I had misunderstood her. I shared a story that inspired me to pursue a career in caregiving. And she smiled warmly and looked at me kindly. I once escorted an elderly woman with dementia to the police station when I was a high school student. Seeing how kindly the caregiving assistant spoke to her, I decided I wanted to be a wonderful woman like that, and I chose the path of caregiving. I'm really proud to have become your mother-in-law. Now that I know Dorothy isn't the type to judge people based on education or background, we spend enjoyable times together, grabbing lunch or coffee whenever we can. But problems never cease. About 3 years into our marriage, Tony suddenly started being cold to me. I thought he must be tired from work, so I tried to keep things cheerful. Welcome home. They're showing that movie we watched on our first date on TV today. Want to watch it together? It had become a tradition to prepare popcorn and watch it together whenever it aired on TV. I'm tired of it already. Sorry, but I have work left to do. Tony avoided eye contact and disappeared into his workroom. When I passed by his room after taking a bath, I heard laughter from inside, Tony's laughter, which had become rare recently. I thought, is it an online meeting? But it sounds too fun. I tried not to think too deeply about it and went to my bedroom alone. However, by ignoring these occasional feelings of discomfort, the gap between Tony and me had grown irreparably deep. Previously, on our anniversaries and my birthdays, Tony always remembered to send flowers and gifts, but now he doesn't come home, claiming overtime, and sometimes reeks of alcohol when he does. Why do you smell like alcohol when you said you were working overtime? I demanded. Tony nonchalantly replied that a sudden business dinner had come up, clicking his tongue in annoyance. Gradually, our nights together dwindled, and even if I snuggled up to him in bed, Tony would twist uncomfortably and turn his back to me. My work isn't like your squad caregiving job. I use my brain and get tired. Tony spat out without looking at me. I thought, squad? Is that what he thinks of my job? I take pride in my caregiving work. It's a fulfilling job where I can help people. And while I don't do it just for thanks, it feels good to be appreciated. However, caregiving is not all fun and games, it's mostly tough. And I'm exhausted after work, studying between work and house chores to improve my skills. As anger welled up inside me, I also felt sad to be belittled about my job. But I hated for fights to spoil the atmosphere at home, so I bit my lip and held back. I thought, Tony must just be tired, he doesn't mean it. I kept telling myself this and continued to endure. But my patience was in vain, and the situation worsened. Tony claimed to be working overtime or on business trips, and meals at home became exceedingly rare. When he did eat at home, he was distant, mechanically shoveling food into his mouth. How's the seasoning on the turkey? Should it be stronger? Tony didn't respond, as if he hadn't heard my voice. Hey, listen. What? When I asked about the seasoning again. Turkey? Oh, it doesn't matter as long as it's edible, Tony said with an indifferent face, fiddling with his phone out of my sight. Then, suddenly standing up, he said he had a call from work and left the food to lock himself in his workroom. Tony didn't come out of the room again, and I sighed, looking at the half-eaten meal he had left. It was expensive fish. I had splurged, hoping to energize him after his recent string of late nights. If he wasn't going to eat, I wished he would tell me. I wrapped the leftovers and put them in the fridge for my lunch the next day. The next day, Tony staggered home drunk at 2 a.m. I had reached my breaking point. "Hey, can't you at least let me know if you're going to be late?" It wasn't much to ask for, a simple message would have sufficed. "Some urgent work came up, and I'm tired, so stop nagging," Tony snapped, clumsily kicking off his shoes and dramatically covering his ears with his palms. Nagging? I have to prepare meals and plan my own schedule, you know. Plan? You're always just cooking the same stuff. Who do you think works to afford this nice house anyway? His words, belittling me while drunk, left me speechless. This house was actually built by his mother, Dorothy. And Tony hadn't paid a penny towards it. Besides utilities, which were paid by direct debit, I covered everything else from my salary. Initially, Tony would give me some cash, but he gradually started avoiding the subject. I nearly spoke up, but bit my lip to avoid hurting Tony's pride. Tony seemed to guess what I wanted to say and glared at me, frowning deeply. His right arm moved, and I instinctively braced for a blow. But then he suddenly laughed and gave me a condescending smirk. "Well, your poor parents didn't contribute a penny, did they?" The words were as hurtful as physical violence. "What are you saying?" I was too angry to articulate my thoughts properly as he mocked the parents who had raised me lovingly. Indeed, my family wasn't wealthy, but they had offered to help, which Tony had refused. I remembered the mixed expressions of gratitude and apology on my parents' faces back then. "I'm happy just to be married to Kathy." Back then, I proudly watched Tony as he gently embraced me, thinking I had chosen the right person. Yet now, leaving me dumbfounded, he spat out, "I'm taking a bath," and stormed off to the room. From that day on, Tony started staying at a hotel more than once a week, even though he wasn't on a business trip, and he never informed me beforehand. He claimed it was a busy period at work. But this busy period had been going on for over half a year now. As usual, I was having breakfast alone in the morning when Tony called. "Hey, I'm at the station now. Bring me a change of underwear and a shirt." "What?" "I have to visit a client before I go to the office today." "I can't." "Fine, then come within 10 minutes. Tony hung up abruptly, without any regard for my schedule. Had I become more of a servant than a wife in his eyes? It was already 8 a.m. I left my breakfast, quickly packed a change of clothes in a paper bag, and ran out without even putting on makeup. My hair disheveled. I arrived at the station gasping for breath, where Tony took the paper bag without a word of thanks. "Wait here," he said arrogantly, pointing to the ground as he entered the station restroom to change. When I checked my phone, it was nearly 8:30 a.m. I had promised to be at my client's place by 9 a.m. Tony finally came out of the restroom after changing. The shirt and underwear he had been wearing were crumpled up in the paper bag he handed back to me. Tony glanced at my face, clicked his tongue, and scoffed. "At least put on some makeup, won't you?" He mocked my disheveled appearance and hurriedly walked towards the ticket gate. I thought, "It's your fault." I wanted to shout at Tony's back, but I had no time for arguments. I shook my hair again and ran to my client's house. After finishing my work and returning home, I took Tony's laundry out of the bag and a sweet scent filled the air. At first, I thought it was the hotel soap. But the fragrance was too strong, it had to be perfume. When I told Tony about it after he came home, he visibly panicked. Ah. That. It's just the perfume of the woman next to me on the crowded train. As he nervously rambled on about things I hadn't even asked. My suspicion only deepened. The next day, Tony came home unusually early, holding a pink paper bag. Actually, I've been looking for a perfume that suits you recently. So maybe that's why my shirt smelled. Why? It's not even my birthday. Confusion overtook any sense of delight, and I inadvertently frowned. What? I can't give you something even if it's not a special day? Ungrateful. Tony seemed displeased by my reaction, threw his bag on the sofa, and sulked. A few days later, while I was having coffee at Dorothy's house on a weekend, Tony, who had said he was working, called shortly after leaving the house. It's terrible. It seems Mom has fallen down the stairs at home and gotten hurt. He spoke loudly, so his voice leaked from the smartphone. I thought, my mother-in-law? But she's right in front of me. As I was puzzled, Dorothy gestured with her eyes and shushed me by pressing her index finger to her lips. I placed the smartphone on speaker mode between Dorothy and myself. Hey? Did Mom really get hurt? I pressed Tony for clarification, wanting Dorothy to hear him clearly. That's what I'm saying. Then, I'll rush to the family home right now. As I said this, Tony replied in a flustered voice. What? You don't get along with her, do you? Leave her to me. I'm going to the family home to take care of her for a while. I'm more qualified for caregiving. I said it's fine. By then. Not wanting to continue the conversation, Tony hung up abruptly. Dorothy, who had been holding back her laughter, burst out laughing once the call ended. Let's see how it goes for a while. Since Dorothy suggested it, I decided to watch the situation for a while too. A week later, Tony came home to pick up some clothes. Hey, how's Mom doing? I pretended to be genuinely concerned and asked Tony in a nurturing tone. Ah, the surgery went well, and she'll be discharged soon. I mercilessly pointed out the contradiction in Tony's words. What? Weren't you supposed to be on home care? Tony made a face that said he'd been caught and started making excuses at a rapid pace. Yeah. That's right. He was rushed to the hospital with a sudden illness. Had surgery, and then fell and sprained his ankle during rehab at the hospital. Stupid, right? What? A sudden illness? It wasn't an injury? I didn't ease up on my questioning. Sweat started to bead on Tony's face. Recently, he had been quite subdued, but now he looked pathetically flustered. And I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Then, the door of the next room swung open with force. Let's hear more about that, said Dorothy, who had been waiting in the next room, crossing her arms as she appeared. Tony, caught off guard by his mother's sudden entrance, just gaped, opening and closing his mouth like a fish. What? I thought you two didn't get along. It seemed Tony still believed that his mother and I were not on good terms. No wonder, as there had been virtually no real conversation between Tony and me for years. I had tried several times to tell Tony that any misunderstandings with Dorothy had been cleared up, and we were now like friends. It was Tony who had been avoiding conversation with me. Suddenly, Tony seemed to have an idea and exclaimed, Ah. Mom? That was Kathy's misunderstanding. Yeah. It was Mr. Owen. a senior colleague who slipped and severely injured himself at home. His excuse, unfit for an adult professional, made me look at him with a cold eye. Then, I casually pulled out my smartphone from my pocket and tapped the screen. "Leave Mom to me. I'm going to the family home to take care of her for a while." By then, I had recorded a phone call from Tony from a week ago, starting midway through the call. I clearly hear Mom though. Watching Tony turn pale as his big lie was exposed. Dorothy and I couldn't hold back our laughter any longer. Then Dorothy abruptly stopped laughing, furrowed her brow, and took a deep breath. "You. Which mom have you been taking care of?" Tony, scolded by his mother, collapsed in shock. He had once told me that he had rarely been scolded by his mother. Looking up at Dorothy with teary eyes, Tony seemed just like a little child. "What? You hated Kathy too, didn't you? You always belittled her caregiving job." Tony tried to shift the blame to Dorothy in a near-crying voice. "That's because I saw Kathy leaving the house at night and suspected she was cheating. I would never belittle her caregiving work." Dorothy began to explain a connection between herself and me that Tony still didn't know about. The elderly woman I had taken to the police station in high school, which had inspired her to pursue caregiving, was actually Dorothy's mother and Tony's grandmother. When I had first visited Tony's home to formally announce our marriage, the grandmother had already passed away, so I hadn't realized who she was. "What?" Tony exclaimed in a stunned voice. "I have nothing but gratitude for Kathy. I respect such a kind-hearted person like her. I would never disdain or mock her." Though Tony had been looking meek earlier, he suddenly looked up and glared at me. "Damn it. I married you thinking that someday you'd take care of my parents. Because you work in caregiving. If not for that, why would I choose a poor high school graduate like you?" Saying this, Tony threw socks and a tie from his bag at me in a fit of childish anger. Overwhelmed by his immaturity, I was more appalled than angry. Dorothy stepped between Tony and me, shielding me. "You shouldn't judge people by their backgrounds." I stopped Dorothy from raising her hand against Tony and gestured to her to look at the time. "It's about time, Mom. This isn't the end, Tony." "Right, let's get to the main point then." Tony defiantly rolled his eyes and clicked his tongue. "Is there still more?" Just then, the doorbell rang as if on cue. "Hello from Flower Garden." A lively female voice was heard, and as I opened the front door, a young woman in her early 20s stood there holding a bouquet. I invited her inside. Confused but following along, she gasped in surprise when she saw Tony sitting on the floor. "What? Tony? Yikes." Tony made a strangled noise upon seeing the woman's face. The florist looked back and forth between Tony and us, her expression full of suspicion. "What's going on here?" As the woman questioned Tony, he screamed as if in agony and fled into the next room, slamming and locking the door behind him. "I don't know you. It's a case of mistaken identity. We are strangers to each other." From his clumsy tone, it was clear Tony was in considerable confusion. "What?" "It's me, Alyssa. We were together just this morning." "Ha. No, it's a mistake." Alyssa, who had introduced herself, called out to Tony through the door. But he had clammed up, probably cowering and covering his ears, waiting for things to cool down. Seeing my husband reduced to such a pathetic state, I was beyond anger or sadness. "What do you mean?" "He's definitely my fiancé." "What have you done to him?" Alyssa's anger was directed not at the fleeing Tony, but at Dorothy and me. Actually, Dorothy and I had known about Alyssa beforehand. The day after Tony made a false call about his mother being injured, we became certain of his affair and headed to a detective agency. Evidence of Tony's infidelity was easily found, and the other party was the clerk at the florist's, where he used to buy flowers for my birthday. The detective suggested that Alyssa might not know Tony was married. She seemed happy talking to colleagues about her upcoming marriage. Dorothy and I had pondered how to convince Alyssa that Tony was married, and how to corner the argumentative Tony effectively. Yesterday, after Tony said he'd come to pick up some things, I immediately contacted Dorothy and hurriedly reserved a bouquet at the florist where Alyssa worked. Alyssa, I'm sorry to involve you in this. I am Tony's wife, Kathy. I apologized to Alyssa for involving her in the plan, and told her politely that I was Tony's wife. What? Don't lie. I'm going to marry him. Please don't interfere. Seeing Alyssa's disbelief reinforced my conviction that carrying out this plan was the right decision. Words alone wouldn't have convinced her that Tony was already married. I showed Alyssa a wedding album I had prepared on the table. She gasped sharply, hesitantly took the album, and slowly turned the pages. After returning the album to me, Alyssa bit her lip and clenched her fists, holding back tears. Suddenly, she apologized to me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Seeing such an honest and good person being deceived intensified my anger towards Tony again. Tony! Come out here. Alyssa yelled towards the room Tony had fled into, pounding on the door with her clenched fists. Despite everything, Tony continued to remain silent. Alyssa had even introduced Tony as her fiancé to her father. She mentioned that her father was pleased upon hearing the name of Tony's company, believing it was reputable. My father is the president of a client company that does business with yours. You might know it as Morris Trading. Morris Trading was a well-known major corporation. When Alyssa mentioned the company name, the door to the room Tony had escaped into burst open. What? I didn't know about this. Tony emerged pale-faced, tripped on the carpet, crawled on the floor, and clung to Alyssa's legs. Alyssa, I'm sorry. Tony grabbed her hands, spouting insincere lines like, I love you. And you're the only one for me. I was planning to divorce her when I met you. It's true. Tony jetted his chin towards me. It was clear he meant me when he said her. What? I can't believe this. I'm glad I didn't end up marrying a scumbag like you. Alyssa turned back to me. Thank you for telling me, Kathy. Alyssa, who had been standing up for me, brushed off Tony's hands as if shaking off dirt. So be it. I really wanted to marry Alyssa, but if she hates me, we'll break up. Despite the dire situation, Tony seemed relieved. As if he thought he could end it here. He was despicably cowardly. However, Alyssa's next words plunged him into despair. What? You think this is over? I will never forgive you for deceiving not just me, but my father too. I will sue for compensation. So no. Tony crawled on the floor, then clung to his mother's legs. Help me. Mom. Dorothy, like Alyssa, shook him off. I've pampered you too much, because you had no father. Hurting a young woman and the kind Kathy, this time. I must teach you a proper lesson. So. I don't have the money to pay the compensation. Tony, though well paid, had almost no savings. Recently, multiple notices from consumer loans had been frequently arriving for Tony. I had noticed that his spending had become extravagant over the years. He had custom-made expensive suits and shopped at overseas boutiques, often visiting hair salons, probably to impress the young Alyssa. Alyssa, who had been involved with such a despicable man, glared at him angrily. "I will contact you through a lawyer. Don't ever show up in front of me again." Alyssa spoke firmly to Tony and nodded at me before leaving. As we watched her leave, Dorothy and I turned back to Tony. When Dorothy called his name, Tony visibly flinched. "You're just like your father." His looks and his deeds. Once, Dorothy's husband, Tony's father, had cheated with a younger woman, fathered a child, and eventually abandoned the family. Dorothy and I left the lifeless shell of a man that was Tony behind, and walked out of the house. I couldn't bear to live under the same roof with Tony anymore and decided to stay with Dorothy for a while. The next day, I received a call from Alyssa. She had seen my mobile number on the flower reservation slip and decided to call. Alyssa's father had promptly called Tony's company to complain. He even threatened to terminate their business dealings. But senior executives from both companies desperately tried to calm him down. Although they managed to avoid terminating the deal, Tony was demoted and sent to a subsidiary in a rural area of Southeast Asia. Alyssa successfully sued Tony and obtained the desired compensation. "Kathy, I'm truly sorry. It's only you for me, come with me." Covered in debt from alimony and credit loans, and ultimately forced to go alone to a rural area abroad, Tony, with tears and snot running down his face, grabbed my hand and pleaded for reconciliation. "I have my caregiving job, so I can't follow you. Make sure you work hard and pay Alyssa the compensation." I left the divorce papers on the table, packed my things, and left the house. I didn't ask for any compensation for myself. I didn't want to burden Dorothy, and I could live well enough on my own earnings. Months later, I passed the certified caregiver exam. Dorothy, no longer my mother-in-law but still rejoicing as if it were her own success, and I continued to enjoy our chats and coffee breaks. We were bound by a deep friendship that transcended our former familial ties. Occasionally, we reflected on the past, but we both looked forward without dwelling on it, enjoying our new lives. Sleeping in the middle of the day. What easygoing days you live. You useless woman. That's how my mother-in-law insults me. To her, it seems I'm just a woman being supported by my husband. She doesn't understand the struggles I've endured, and the vast amount of time I've invested. Just 15 minutes. I simply lay down to take a short break and closed my eyes, which made my mother-in-law furious. I was just trying to take a little break. Don't talk back. You are just a maid here. If you're going to slack off on your housework, get out of this house. My mother-in-law doesn't listen at all. Every day, she disturbs me while I work from home and makes snide remarks. It's unreasonable to expect me to endure this lifestyle any longer. I decided to stand up and said, "Understood. With pleasure. I'll leave, just as you wish, ma'am." I spoke in a flabbergasted tone, and she was stunned, saying, "What?" Ignoring her, I quickly packed my things and prepared to leave the house. As my mother-in-law silently followed, I said, "Oh, what do you think Peter will say when he hears about this? If I tell him what you've done, he'll be furious, won't he? You sure are confident in being loved, despite being a mere maid. I'm looking forward to it." and I left the house. As expected, my husband was furious when he heard my story. The punishment he gave his mother was beyond my imagination. My name is Tracy. I am currently 28 years old, and aside from being a housewife, I work part-time as a cashier at a nearby supermarket. I work from Monday to Friday, from 8 a.m. until noon. I got to know Peter at university through the tennis club, which led to our dating. He treasures me greatly and often praises me, saying things like, "Thank you always. The meals you make are the tastiest in the world. Your outfit today is cute." I love Peter so much that about 4 years into our relationship, he proposed to me, and we got married. We've been living ordinary, happy days. About a year after our marriage, Peter suggested, "Tracy, shouldn't we start thinking about buying our own home?" Indeed, the apartment we currently live in is the same one room we moved into when we were dating. It's far from the bus stop and on the 4th floor without an elevator, which is quite exhausting just to return home. A home of our own. That sounds nice. The 4th floor is tough. And if we continue to live in this apartment, it would be too cramped to raise a child, wouldn't it? Right. It's small and the bus stop is far. Maybe it's time to move? As we talked about moving into our dream home, the conversation about what we wanted in a home expanded, like a laundry room. A spacious garden, wanting at least 2 children's rooms. And we began to finalize the ideal floor plan. Then suddenly Peter said, "You know, Tracy, actually, my mom is living alone in a big house right now. And it's too big for her to maintain, so she's thinking of selling it. Since there's no place for her to live, she wants to live with us. What do you think?" Peter lost his father to illness 2 years ago. Being an only child, his mother has been living alone. But the house his father built was too large and gradually became financially and physically challenging to maintain. So, that means the 3 of us would live together? You probably hate the idea, right? I know. It seems she's also been looking at apartments. But she hasn't found a good place yet. He said, seeing my reaction and speaking apologetically. It's not that I hate the idea. I always had a good impression of my mother-in-law as a kind and friendly person. But I was worried that living together might be exhausting and could potentially worsen our relationship. However, I couldn't just ignore her with nowhere to live. After a moment of thought, all right then. If that's the case, let's make it a 2-family house. To avoid getting on each other's nerves and accumulating stress, let's install utilities on both the 1st and 2nd floors now. Really? Thank you, Tracy. Mom will be happy too. Yeah. Although we've already decided on a floor plan, let's rethink it. With that, we apologized to the home builder and started planning a new layout that could accommodate my mother-in-law along with my husband and me. Later, my mother-in-law called. "Tracy, are you really okay with living together?" "Yes. It's fine. We've already decided. Let's live happily together, okay? However, I do want us to avoid interfering too much with each other. Like how we do housework, work methods, and so on." That's true. We would just tire each other out. Let's do that. I'm really glad to have such a kind daughter-in-law. Thank you. At that time, I thought choosing to live together was the right decision. Little did I know that I would later realize this choice was a mistake. The house was completed, and after finishing moving in, the 3 of us decided to have dinner together. At the table, my mother-in-law asked, "By the way, Tracy, what kind of job are you doing now?" "I'm currently working part-time at a nearby supermarket." "Huh? Part-time?" For a moment, her brows seemed to furrow. "I only work part-time until noon." My mother-in-law responded with a skeptical and a discontented expression. "When I was your age, I was working my fingers to the bone, barely having time to sleep. It's amazing you can afford such a lovely home without working full-time. You really married up, huh?" Her sarcastic comment was unpleasant. But I chose not to retort and instead replied lightly, "Oh, is that so? I guess I'm just lucky." I really should be grateful to Peter. Later, I learned from my husband that his mother had worked as a nurse until retirement, including many night shifts, and it must have been tough for her. Perhaps she was irritated seeing me only working part-time. I decided to avoid discussing my work in front of her. But it's true, even though it's just a part-time job, I do have some spare time. Not wanting to be looked down upon, I discussed with my husband the idea of starting to sell the handmade jewelry I've always wanted to make. "Hey, I've been making earrings and necklaces for myself. But after posting them on social media, I got more positive responses than expected. I'm thinking of starting to sell them. What do you think?" "That sounds great. You've always wanted to showcase your creations. I'll help out in any way I can, as long as it doesn't overwhelm you." Encouraged by my husband, I began selling my handmade items alongside my part-time job and housework. Once I started selling, it turned out to be more successful than anticipated, earning good reviews from buyers and keeping me increasingly busy. One day, while working from home, my mother-in-law approached me. "Tracy, what are you spreading out all over the place?" She approached me as I was laying out various jewelry parts and design sketches. "Oh, these? I'm just making some accessories." I hesitated to mention I was selling them because I didn't want to invite criticism. People who only work part-time sure seem to have a lot of free time. If you have time for that, why don't you make some dishes instead? "Oh, yeah," I muttered as she left after dropping her snide comment. Despite our initial agreement not to interfere with each other's work and housework, I ended up having to cook not just for myself but for her as well. I thought, why on earth does she come upstairs to our living space so casually, when we specifically arranged for a two-family setup to avoid this kind of thing? My frustration grew. The next day was the same. "Hey, Tracy, you must be free, right? Make my meal too." "You're slow," she called out casually. "Yes, I'll do that," I replied, beginning to prepare her meal as if it were the most natural task. I thought she could just make it herself, but I couldn't actually say that out loud. Recently, her behavior towards me had escalated, and it was starting to worry me. I intended to discuss it with my husband, but he was swamped at work and often came home late, leaving us little time to talk. Then one day, when I returned home after my part-time job, I found my mother-in-law in my room, looking at my computer without permission. "What? Why are you in my room? What's with the loud voice? It's the same house, so I can enter any room I want, can't I? That's troubling. I have personal things here. Please, don't enter my room without permission. Do you have something you don't want me to see?" "It's not like that, but..." "Like this," she said, holding up my laptop and showing me the history of my online sales. The fact that she went through my computer was chilling. I didn't intend to hide it, but please don't go through my things without permission. To think you were moonlighting. I thought you were just slacking off at home. But here you are selling these trivial accessories. You really are a carefree daughter-in-law. Trivial. I put a lot of effort into my work, and I knew you would belittle it. Which is why I didn't tell you about my side business. To talk back to me, a mere maid. What nerve you have. Maid. Is that what you think of me? Of course. What else would a wife who doesn't bring in much income be but a maid? You should be grateful that I let you stay in my house as a maid. Her words were too harsh, leaving me speechless. How could she say such things? It was too much. But arguing with her was a waste of time when I could be finishing work. For my customers who are waiting for their orders. With that in mind, I firmly said, "Please, don't ever enter my room again." And ushered her out, closing the door behind her. Orders kept coming in while I was dealing with this. I decided to focus on my work and not let her bother me. However, a certain action from her soon pushed my anger to its limits. One day, as usual, I was engrossed in making my handmade crafts. That morning, my mother-in-law had left the house saying, "I'm going out to lunch with the neighbors, so you take care of dinner. Make sure you don't slack off on the housework, maid," and, as usual, she dumped the responsibility of cooking and housekeeping on me. Understood. While I was irritated by her comments, I was relieved inside that she wouldn't be home today. I could work without feeling self-conscious. Sales have been good recently. And I've been expanding my work, even doing some drawing. It's been busy, but I really enjoy my work and find it rewarding. And my husband Peter has been supportive. I thought to myself, let's work even harder. As I was drawing, I started feeling sleepy after several nights of continuous work. I can't create good work if I keep going like this, I thought. So I decided to take a break and drank some coffee in the living room. Oh, I'm still sleepy even after the coffee, I thought as I lay down on the sofa. I don't know how much time had passed, when suddenly something very hot splashed on my face, and I jumped up, screaming, "Ouch!" When I opened my eyes, there was my mother-in-law, standing with her hands on her hips. It had only been 15 minutes since I had fallen asleep. "What are you doing?" I was furious. It was no wonder, as she had splashed hot water on my face. Sleeping in the middle of the day. What easygoing days you live. You useless woman. To her, it seems I'm just a woman being supported by my husband. She doesn't understand the struggles I've endured. And the vast amount of time I've put into making my work successful. Just 15 minutes. I had simply laid down to rest my eyes, and for that, she splashed me with hot water. I was just trying to take a break. How could you splash hot water on someone's face? What if you had burned me? Don't talk back. You are just a maid here. Didn't I tell you not to slack off on your chores? If you have a complaint, then leave this house. My mother-in-law wouldn't listen at all. Every day she would interrupt my work from home and make snide remarks. It's unreasonable to expect me to endure this lifestyle any longer. I've reached my limit. Understood. With pleasure. I'll leave, just as you wish, ma'am. I spoke in a flabbergasted tone, and she was stunned, saying, "What?" Ignoring her, I went back to my room and packed the bare minimum of my belongings. As I was leaving the house, I said, "Oh, and please explain everything to Peter. If you tell him what you've done to me, I think he'll be furious, huh? You seem very confident of being loved. Just a mere maid leaving the house, and he won't care, will he?" Oh, is that so? I'm looking forward to it, and I left the house. That day, I looked for a place to stay and managed to secure a bed at a hotel. Then I immediately called my husband. I've decided to leave the house. My husband was quite startled by my sudden declaration. What? What happened? Why so suddenly? I could tell he was panicking even over the phone. I was napping, and your mother splashed hot water on my face. Then she kicked me out of the house. I can't live with such a person anymore. My mom did that. How terrible. Are you okay? Did you get burned? My husband asked, genuinely concerned first and foremost. I'm okay. Just a bit sore on my cheek and neck. I can't believe it. I won't forgive my mom, no matter that she's family. I'm coming to pick you up right now to talk. Where are you? My husband seemed very upset. Soon after, he came to pick me up. And after discussing it together, we decided not to return home that day, but to stay at the hotel and think things over. The next day, I've decided what to do next. Let's go home together. I'll talk to my mom. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. She went too far. There's no saving her now. Saying that, we decided to return home together. When we arrived, Peter got out of the car first and entered the house. Oh, good morning, Peter. You didn't come home yesterday. I was worried, my mother-in-law greeted him, oblivious to everything. As I got out of the car and was about to enter the house, she scoffed. Huh, you came back? Persistent, aren't you? Clearly displeased. Hearing her remark, Peter glared at her fiercely. Mom. So, you've been harassing Tracy and making snide comments. When I'm not around, haven't you? What are you talking about? I haven't done anything, she tried to deny it. I know everything. What did you do to Tracy yesterday? Peter exploded. What? It's her fault for slacking off as a maid and napping during the day. Right? Such a freeloader should be kicked out, shouldn't she? Maid. Tracy earns $30,000 a month. She's far more successful than I am. Peter, you didn't have to say that. What? $30,000? You must be joking. How can a woman who just makes trinkets and taps on a computer earn that much? Trinkets? That's rude. Just so you know, I've recently launched my own brand. And even received collaboration requests from famous celebrities, I bragged lightly. That's absurd. My mother-in-law collapsed, overwhelmed by the truth. Mom, Tracy has been perfectly managing both the household and her work amidst her busy schedule. And yet, this treatment. No matter that you're my mom, I can't forgive this anymore. There's a place you need to go. Saying this, he got her into the car. I also got in, and we drove to a certain destination. When we arrived, she gasped in disbelief. What? No way. It was the police station. As my mother-in-law stood there dumbfounded, he said, You splashed Tracy with boiling water, right? Her face and neck got burned, and she was told it would take a week to heal. We've got the medical report. You need to make amends. Indeed, since then, the pain in my cheek and neck hadn't subsided. And after visiting the hospital, it turned out I had sustained burns. After discussing it with Peter, we decided that this act could not go unpunished. It's too much, even for a mother-in-law. There's a risk to life if this happens again, so please stay out of our lives from now on. I'm so sorry. I never imagined it would come to this. I didn't know Tracy was working so hard at her job and at home. I'm really sorry. Please, withdraw the police report. Please. My mother-in-law was crying out and pleading. No. It's already decided. With that, he pushed her into the police station. With the medical report in hand, she was given a real sentence. She was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. After that, we decided to sell the house we had been living in. We couldn't risk her returning to it after getting out of prison. We also bought a new home for ourselves, as we had the financial means to do so. Unlike the previous time, where we considered my mother-in-law in the home layout. This time it was a home just for us. Of course, we didn't give her the new address. Our new home quickly became our favorite place. 1.5 years later, after serving her sentence, my mother-in-law called Peter once. I was out of my mind. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize. I was disillusioned by your actions back then because I cared about you, Mom. Please don't involve yourself with us anymore. Don't say that. I want to properly apologize to Tracy. Please, let me speak to her. Peter, about to hang up, said, "What are you saying? Do you realize what you did to Tracy?" "I know. That's why I want to apologize." "Then stay away from Tracy." I stopped him. "It's okay. I'll speak to her. It's been a while." "Oh. Tracy, I'm really sorry about what happened. I didn't understand you at all and did something terrible. I really regret it now." She seemed to be deeply remorseful. "It's okay. I've heard your apology and you've made amends. I'm really, really sorry." She apologized repeatedly. After her release, without a home, she apparently lived modestly in public housing on her pension. But that's irrelevant to me now. Feeling there was nothing more to discuss, I handed the phone back to Peter. Then Peter said, "Please don't involve yourself with us anymore. Good luck." And with that, he hung up. "Looks like your mother got out." "Yeah, seems like it." "Aren't you going to see her?" "I'm okay now. She's your real mother, after all." "No, it's okay. We're going to be happy with our new baby, right?" He patted my belly. Yes, I was actually pregnant. 8 months along. The baby was stable, and my belly was noticeably larger. Yes. We have to protect this child no matter what. 2 months later, I gave birth safely to a beautiful baby girl. Despite the busy days filled with work, childcare, and household chores, we are living happily together with our precious little one.
Amy, thanks for taking care of my daughter for the past month. I'll come to pick her up tomorrow. What are you talking about? Patty, who had been traveling for a month, was still at the airport. I could hear the flight transfer announcements over the phone. Unlike my calm reply, she started to panic. Oh no. What are you saying? She must be there, right? I left Mia in your apartment's garage. Mia is her daughter, hence my niece. I haven't seen her. When are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I sent you a message, so you should know. I haven't received any messages. No, that's impossible. Patty, now in panic, screamed over the phone. What are you going to do about this? I left Mia in your care. You have to take responsibility if something happens. After hanging up once, Patty tried calling Mia's child-friendly smartphone but couldn't connect, and continued to panic. She called me back hurriedly, screaming even more, so I suggested she might as well go home. Oh, that's right. That's a good idea. After hanging up, she headed home quickly, but there she found Victor, Mia, and me together. Patty looked puzzled, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to ask why the three of us were together. Patty, I've heard everything from these two. What? At Victor's words, she was shocked and turned pale. My name is Amy Baker. Until a few years ago, I worked for a company. At 40, I became independent and started working as a freelance illustrator. My income has increased, and now I live alone in an apartment. My job is primarily home-based. And I only leave the house occasionally for shopping or meetings with clients. I'm not married and don't have a partner, but I'm satisfied with my life. Friends sometimes ask if I'm lonely, but I've never thought about it. I'm more fulfilled by my work and don't plan to look for a partner. I am a bit worried about my old age, but when the time comes, I'll think about it, which sometimes surprises me with my own optimism. Today, after finishing a deadline for an illustration, I took a break at 3 p.m. and looked at the calendar. Then I realized that my brother Victor's birthday was coming up soon. Victor, 5 years older than me, works as a salesperson for a major publishing company, and often lives away from family for quite a long time to work for a specific project. Occasionally, he brings back souvenirs from his workplace. Last month, he dropped by my place unexpectedly and brought some cookies as a souvenir. I invited Victor inside, made coffee, and we ate the cookies together. You should buy more for Patty and Mia instead of me. But I need to see your face from time to time. I wouldn't want you to have collapsed or something. That protective, considerate nature is what has always been one of Victor's good traits. Patty and Mia are his wife and daughter, making them my sister-in-law and niece, respectively. I haven't told Victor, but I find Patty a bit difficult. She's very outgoing. Always dressed fashionably with trendy nails and clothes, giving off a glamorous vibe. That's not a bad thing in itself, and I don't really mind. But she often seems to look down on me for being single. During a family gathering on Christmas, when she found out I didn't have a partner or a spouse, she laughed out loud. Amy, are you the type who thinks you can put off marriage because you believe you're still young and beautiful? Do you know about the right time to marry? Well, I think marriage and relationships are personal values. I don't think it's necessary to have a partner. As I responded, Patty laughed again. What was so funny, I couldn't tell, maybe it was the alcohol. But she kept teasing me about the same thing, which was exhausting. When choosing my apartment, one of my absolute criteria was to be far from my brother's place, mainly because of Patty. However, I got along well with my niece Mia. She's turning 10 this year and apparently goes to school carrying a cute light blue backpack. I haven't seen her in it, but she told me about it when she visited my place. Amy, you draw so well. Mia was watching me work on my illustrations and was fascinated by the pictures on the computer screen. I want to draw too. Oh, wanna try? Really? Sure, I have plenty of time before the deadline, you can try drawing a bit. Mia sat in front of the computer, excitedly moving the pen. What she drew then was her light blue backpack. She mentioned that it was heavy because she has a tablet inside. In the summer, the water bottle makes it even heavier. Yet despite being so small, Mia handles it admirably. According to Mia, while Victor is away on business, leaving his home, Patty spends her time as she pleases. She buys ready-made meals from stores or supermarkets for dinner or lunches when school is off. I usually do the laundry, and sometimes Mom does it. Really?
Yeah.
Also, she gets really angry if there's mud on my shoes after gym class. Why? What does your mom do at home? She's always just watching her smartphone or TV. Mia often stays in her room or heads out to the park or library to avoid upsetting her mom. Hearing this makes me feel that it's not the best parenting, but I hesitate to comment as an outsider. On another occasion, when our family gathered, I saw Patty scolding the quiet Mia harshly over something minor like spilling tea or something. It seemed like something that could simply be wiped up with a cloth. And I thought it unnecessary for her to get so angry. Mom is scary, and she gets angry no matter what I say, so I can't say anything. I couldn't quite forget that Mia's quiet comment as she left. That day after drawing her light blue backpack. It was a sunny weekend day when Patty, going on a day trip with her mom friends, had dropped Mia off. I never imagined that a few days later, a similar message would appear on my smartphone. The autumn leaves in the local park had turned completely, and the chilly weather made me miss the sunshine. When I returned to my apartment after running some errands, I saw the silhouette of a little girl standing alone by the parking area. She was wearing a light blue backpack and her face was half hidden by a mask, but I recognized her. Mia? When I called out, her anxious eyes looked up at me. It was indeed Mia. What are you doing here alone? And what's with that bag? Next to her was a small carry-on suitcase, making it look like she had run away from home. Mom said to go to your house, Amy. Seeing the question marks above my head, Mia pointed to my bag and muttered. On your cell phone. Could there possibly be a message on the smartphone? I quickly pulled out my smartphone from my bag, and indeed, there was a recent message from Patty. Sorry for the sudden notice, Amy. I'm going on a trip with a friend for a month starting today. Please take care of my daughter. As I finished reading, an exclamation of confusion escaped my lips, but I quickly closed my mouth. Of course, it was out of bewilderment, but first, I decided to bring the understandably confused Mia inside. Once we were inside and she took off her mask, Mia's cheeks were as red as apples, and her hands were very cold. I made her some hot cocoa and offered her some snacks while I listened to her story. Mia was drawing on her notebook in her room just a while ago. Patty barged into her room without knocking, handed her the carry-on suitcase, and said, Mia, you're going to Amy's house now, so get ready. Mom won't be home for a month, so take your backpack too, okay? Understood? Okay. Thus, Mia hastily packed her notebook, pencil case, textbooks, and tablet into her backpack while Patty was on the phone, sounding very excited. Really? That's great. Hey, you're already drinking? That's too fast. Patty's voice was high-pitched and filled the house. Laughter different from the usual motherly tone floated down from the stairs, and Mia had to cover her ears. Once the phone call ended, Patty's voice returned to normal. And then Mia was left at that place with her luggage. Mom said to be good because I'm staying with Amy for a month, and told to wait there under the chilly sky. Despite the sunshine, it was quite cold. I was getting angry thinking about what Patty would have done if Mia had gotten sick. But does my brother, I mean, your father, know about this? I don't think so. Mom doesn't really talk to Dad much. Mia said this while munching on chocolate cookies. Seeing cookie crumbs on her cheeks was endearing. But I felt it was wrong not to tell my brother about the situation, so I decided to call him later. Amy, I don't want to be with Mom anymore. Suddenly, Mia said this while staring at the rim of her juice glass. The girl who had been happily eating cookies now looked burdened beyond her 10 years. Why? Because Mom gets angry quickly, she throws things like the trash can, and it's scary. She throws the trash can? I haven't done anything wrong, but she throws it, saying, "Get out of the way." Or, "Go away." My teachers don't believe me either. I hate it. Tears fell from her eyes, and she cried profusely. I stroked her back and waited for her to calm down, offering tissues. It was clear that what was happening to her was not normal. Convinced of this, I decided to call Victor to see if he could come back. I left her side for a while, planning my words and thinking of a solution as I fiddled with my smartphone. Okay, this might work. I murmured softly and dialed my brother's number. What? Mia. Yes, yes. What's going on? As I explained the situation, Victor sounded quite shaken, his voice trembling slightly. Initially, he tried to joke, saying things like, "Is this some kind of joke?" But as I continued, he seemed to believe me and listened attentively. Then, when I shared my plan with him, Victor agreed and said he would adjust his work and vacation to help out. Okay, thanks. Rest assured, I'll take care of Mia. I hung up the phone, then went back to my smartphone to delete Patty's message from my inbox. I glanced towards the living room, wondering if Mia had calmed down, and slowly walked back in. Tonight, I decided to splurge a little and treat her to something delicious. As I thought this, I slowly made my way back, step by step. Mia's school is a bit far from here, but I explained the situation to the school, and they arranged for her to take the bus. This should make carrying her heavy tablet and backpack a bit easier. I decided to bill Victor later for the bus fare, while I continued my usual work from home during the day. Mia isn't enrolled in any after-school activities, so she comes home and does her homework after school. Amy, can you check this for me? I was surprised since I thought teachers did that, but according to Mia, it was different. All my classmates have their moms do it. I used to do it by myself. As I realized how self-centered Patty had been, I picked up a red pen. After checking the worksheet, it was time to prepare dinner. As I stood in the kitchen, Mia followed me and implied with her eyes that she wanted to help. We're making hamburgers today. Can you start by peeling the onions? Yes. Mia peeled the onions faster than I expected and quickly followed my cooking instructions. I wondered where she had learned to cook so well, but before I could ask, the meal was ready. Time flew by as these days repeated themselves, and before I knew it, a month had passed. While looking at the calendar and thinking it was about time, sure enough, I received a call from Patty on my smartphone. Amy, thanks for taking care of my daughter this past month. I'll come to pick her up tomorrow. What are you talking about? I replied calmly. Patty, who had been traveling for a month, was still at the airport, as I could hear the flight transfer announcements over the phone. Oh, come on, what are you saying? She must be there, right? I left Mia at your apartment complex, so you must know. I haven't seen her. When are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I sent you a message, so you should know. I haven't received any messages. Are you sure you didn't get the wrong person? No, that's impossible. Patty, apparently panicking, screamed over the phone. What are you going to do about this? I left Mia with you. If something happens, you're responsible. I'm calling Mia too. She yelled sharply and abruptly hung up the phone. After a while, she called again, still shouting as she continued to panic. It seems she tried calling Mia's child-friendly smartphone, but couldn't get through and continued to panic. Patty, why don't you go home and calm down first? That's true. Good idea, I'm going home. After that, I could hear Patty arguing with another man in the background, but they were too far away to be understood clearly. The silence that followed was like the calm before the storm. Eventually, when Patty returned home, she stormed down the hallway with heavy footsteps. When she opened the door and entered the living room, her face, which was like a demon's from her messy hair, suddenly turned pale with shock. In the living room were Victor, Mia, and me. Patty seemed to want to ask why all three of us were together, but was so surprised that she couldn't speak. Patty, I've heard everything from these two. And your phone call just now. What? I put the phone on speaker mode so everyone could hear. It'll make it easier to talk about what comes next. It was only natural that Mia's smartphone was off, so it wouldn't connect. How could you do that? That should be my line. You said you didn't know earlier. But I've been taking care of Mia here for a month. How can you just leave and go on a trip, leaving her at someone's house? But I sent you a message. That's not the point. Then Victor carefully chose his words and spoke quietly. Both of you, calm down. Mia is here too. Patty, so it's true you went on a trip by yourself and left Mia behind. Your appearance and luggage look like you've just returned. Patty was dressed in a warm coat and seemed dressed up for a trip. Her luggage was full, perhaps filled with souvenirs and clothes. She didn't deny it but started making excuses. Yes, I did go on a trip. Because, you know, even a housewife needs a break. Doing laundry and cooking every day, it's repetitive and stressful. Just let me have this time with my friends. Are these friends, the ones you're referring to in these emails? I showed her several sheets of copy paper. They contained emails between Patty and a person who seemed to be her affair partner, discussing plans for a trip. The emails weren't just recent but had started around the beginning of last spring. And on the day I only took care of Mia for one day, Patty had gone to see gardens with this person. The day trip with mom friends was a complete lie. Patty, realizing she had been caught, covered her mouth as if to say oops. In fact, a few hours before Patty arrived here, at Mia's request, I had searched through Patty's computer and found these emails. Mia had seen her mother frequently looking at her smartphone and messaging someone, and eventually began to suspect that the person wasn't her father. Her suspicions were confirmed when she saw the name of an unknown man on her mother's smartphone messages, while her mother was asleep in the living room. The voice on the phone wasn't her father's either. Mia had told me 6 months ago that her mother was having an affair. I was skeptical until Patty suddenly announced a month ago that she was going on a trip. But after checking the computer just now, it turned out Mia's intuition was correct. Looking over at Victor, I noticed him quietly, yet visibly shaking. What have you done, really? I trusted you, and you just leave Mia with Amy and go off on a trip to cheat? Victor approached Patty with trembling fists. No, it's a misunderstanding. I was told to go on the trip, I had no choice. What do you mean, no choice? You left this house empty for a month for that reason? Say something that makes sense. I was being threatened. Believe me, Mia, you believe me, right? Mia was suddenly asked to respond, but she answered calmly and plainly. Mom, you were on the phone before you left and you sounded so happy. Plus, you made me do all the cooking and cleaning, and you just slept all day. Mia glared at Patty, seizing the moment. And you told me not to stay up late and to go to bed early. But you would go out at night and not come back until morning and then sleep on the floor. What you said was all messed up. Hearing this, Victor pressed her further. Going out at night, you mean you were out partying? No, that's not it. Mia, just be quiet. I quickly showed Victor a photo on my smartphone. It showed Patty dressed up and leaving the house late at night. This was taken several months ago. Mia contacted me, and I happened to be nearby and took it. I was surprised too. Where were you going at that time of night, Patty?
Oh.
Faced with the photo, Patty seemed to give up trying to escape the truth and just collapsed right there. I can't believe it. I can't leave Mia with you anymore. Let's get a divorce. I'll also ask for compensation for negligence. You can go and be happy with that other man. Victor said that much and then turned his back on Patty. Divorce? Are you kidding? Don't you think it's sad for Mia to not have her mother? What about Mia? Help me, please. No. Absolutely not. Amy is more like a mother to me. It was embarrassing as an adult to see her beg her child like that. But Mia dismissed Patty outright. During the time Mia stayed with me, I made sure to spend quality time with her, talking about school, hobbies, and her future plans. Of course, cooking together was also one of those activities. Don't worry, Patty. I'll make sure Mia is happy, I said with a smile, and Patty just slumped down, saying nothing more. 6 months later, her divorce from Victor was finalized, and custody was granted to Victor. Patty was taken back to her parents' home in her hometown. The man Patty had met online disappeared as soon as he found out she was divorced. And all communication ceased. By the time Patty realized she had been played, she was left with a large amount of compensation and child support to pay. Her savings were insufficient, and she had to ask her parents to cover more than half of it. Consequently, her parents kept a much closer watch on her, and she could no longer go out late at night. Furthermore, because she divorced and returned to her hometown without taking her daughter, rumors spread, and she was often looked at negatively when she went out during the day. So she seldom left the house. Still, she would eventually need to re-enter society. But what happens after that is unknown to me, Victor, and Mia. Victor and Mia decided to rent out their old house, and now live on a different floor in the same apartment building as me. The rental income is intended to help with the mortgage payments and Mia's savings. I started visiting them almost daily. Victor, who had been on many business trips and neglected his family, decided to change jobs after reflecting on his focus on work over family. Changing careers in his 40s was challenging, but his excellent sales records and communication skills meant he could have been in management. So he received job offers from 2 or 3 companies within 6 months, and started working at one of them. I was surprised to learn about Victor's capabilities, as I didn't know he was that skilled. At his previous company, he preferred being a field salesman and had gently declined promotions. I just didn't think it would be interesting to stay on the same company floor all the time. Is that really why? But your new job is fully remote, right? Yes, but it allows me to talk with many different people, which I find interesting. And most importantly, it means I can be with Mia. Mia is still carrying her light blue backpack to school every day. The move resulted in a change of school districts, necessitating Mia to transfer schools. It must have been sad for her to say goodbye to her friends and teachers. But Mia seems surprisingly resilient and is actually enjoying her new school life. Mia, have you gotten used to your new school yet? While we were cooking dinner together, Mia giggled.
Yeah.
I made a friend in the class next door. Already? That was fast. Mia nodded shyly.
Yeah.
We're going to make hamburgers at her house next time. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Seeing her smile brightly made me smile too. Mia dreams of opening a Western-style restaurant one day. Despite being only 10 years old, she has a firm dream, and she shared her reason with me. My friend, like me, doesn't have a mom who cooks, so she makes her own meals. She said she wants to cook for people who don't have anyone to make meals for them, just like us. Is that so? I want to be able to do that too. So, I'm practicing making hamburgers. Her innocent laughter momentarily filled me with a profound, indescribable emotion. But I quickly smiled and responded. That's great, Mia. Your hamburgers are delicious. I hope lots of people get to try them.
Hee hee.
Seeing Mia facing forward so bravely and shining so brightly, I felt confident that her dreams would not just be fantasy. I eagerly await the day Mia grows up and opens her own restaurant.